Poker, it's safer than ICOs.
I really should have done diligence better.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Value.Tokenized. This is Xenia.
And this is Masha.
Today we're super excited because we're interviewing Jor Law. With a legal background, he is most known in the industry as a founder of VerifyInvestor.
That was recently acquired by tZERO. And on top of that, Jor is probably one of our most favorite people in this space.
So we're very excited, and let's get started. Maybe you can tell us a couple of words about yourself and how do you get in the whole security token industry and why? What was your main demo for that?
Yeah, so I've been active in helping to build out the security token ecosystem. My background is as a corporate and securities attorney, but I've always been in capital markets and finance, my entire life. From both a service provider as well as, an investor myself, and just someone that's generally interested in finance. So as the economy grew and the blockchain ecosystem started growing, a lot of people started thinking about different use cases for it. I was one of the ones early on to kind of really think that this would be great for security tokens. So early on, before security tokens were popular, I started trying to align myself with companies that were building security token infrastructure because I thought that I would be a user of this ecosystem in the future. So, from custody to exchange to tokenization technology and beyond, I've been helping build the actual infrastructure that, hopefully people will use in the future.
When was that? So when did you
What
first
year?
start having these thoughts, ideas?
Honestly, a lot of it didn't happen, I think, till 2017. I think maybe I first heard about crypto and Bitcoin in around 2013. I started looking at like maybe trying to mine it. Decided that it wasn't worth the energy cost back then. Around 2015, I tried very hard to kind of get like my law firm to accept Bitcoin as payment and things like that. But it really wasn't toward, maybe, 2017 where like I got extremely active in crypto.
Maybe you can tell us more about your collaboration with tZERO. Together with them, you're really active in building the new security token infrastructure. How did it start?
Yeah, so for tZERO, I kind of have two involvements. My brother JT and I co-founded a company called VerifyInvestor, and VerifyInvestor was a accredited investor verification platform. And really, what it did is it handled a specific part of U.S. law called Rule 506C, and gave the compliance in order for you to be able to do that. Now, it turns out that when you're crowdfunding, if you're generally soliciting people, you're almost always under US law doing it under some sort of registered product, or you're finding an exemption. If you're doing an exemption, usually it's going to be the Rule 506C exemption. So as tokenization became regulated and people realized this was a regulated product, they ended up using crowdfunding and they ended up using Rule 506C, and we were by far the most dominant credit investor verification platform. So tZERO saw some synergies there and wanted to talk to us about maybe being part of the tZERO ecosystem. We thought that that might be a good idea, and in early this year, they acquired a controlling interest in us. So subsequent to that, we've been of course, running that business unit, but also, tZERO has asked us to kind of help out with some other business units of theirs. JT and I have been active in helping build out some of the tZERO ecosystem.
Is it hard to become an accredited investor? Because I think one of the main issues like people are asking about security tokens is that it will limit access of people who usually invested in ICOs for security tokens. So there might be a way to avoid that. So they might become accredited investors and just go on with security tokens.
Yeah, being an accredited investor is unfortunately, it's either tied to like, for individuals, it's either tied to income or wealth. It's not tied to any form of sophistication or anything like that. So as a natural person, you either have to have a reasonably high income, $200,000 to $300,000, depending on whether you're single or whether you're married, or $1 million of net worth, not including your primary residence, right? Either individually or jointly with your spouse. So those thresholds aren't necessarily that high. On the other hand, they do eliminate most of America, right? So, as far as natural persons go, I think the saving grace is that it's not great that not everyone gets to invest, but I think it's a balancing act between how do we protect investors from, being defrauded and things like that. And part of it was that, if you've got people who are rich and or sophisticated, then perhaps they need slightly less protection. And over time, I'm hopeful that with better education in the market, more people kind of learning to invest and things like that, that perhaps the definition of a credit investor can expand, and maybe one day it gets eliminated, or other structuring. For example, I think it would be great if all non-accredited investors could invest, but they see some very clear disclosure that they could lose everything. You require a minimum percentage of accredited investors. So that some rich and sophisticated people are doing this and apparently interested in investing, but then regular people get to also invest in those deals. But I think a lot of this will require education. We don't have a culture that teaches people how to think about financial products and saving and investing, and it'd be great to have more of that.
From your perspective, what are the legal benefits of using a security token over some traditional financial instruments, if there are any?
The legal benefit isn't necessarily that strong right now. I think it's more of a business benefit and a hope of the future. Right now, tokenization is relatively new. As with all new things, if you're the front runner, it costs a little bit more, you get a little bit more uncertainty, but if you pull it off, you get a couple possible advantages, right? One is if you're early enough, you might make some legal mistakes, but the regulators might forgive you, right? You've seen this happen with Ethereum, you see this happen with DAO, where the regulators basically thought that they broke the law, but they looked the other way and said, okay, we're not going to do that. We're not going to enforce against that. But the people that come on later, of course, are not going to get that same benefit where they got to test the waters and make a few mistakes, right? So that's one clear benefit of being an early adopter. Another clear benefit of being an early adopter is that you really can establish a name and reputation for yourself, so that when this product goes mainstream, maybe you're already a little bit further ahead of everybody else.
Like you are.
Well, yeah, maybe. But other than that, honestly, generally the pain of being an early adopter is quite large and severe, as you guys know as well. The business promise would be that if you can tokenize, you might be able to run your deals more efficiently. You might be able to create a liquidity where there wasn't liquidity before. And that's not to say that if you tokenize, there is liquidity, right? That those do not go hand in hand. But if you tokenize, there's easy and readily available technology that helps facilitate liquidity. And we also have a market where there's many people globally who have been used to trading tokens already, right, of some sort. So, they are more familiar with that technology, and that technology can be taught to other people. Compare that with just regular digital securities, which don't necessarily trade, even though they are tradable. You just don't have a base of investors in the secondary market trading that.
When will this happen? Because I think liquidity is the main point that people who are early into this market use to convince others that it's worth trying, that it's worth getting in on board early. But when actually this liquidity will happen, when this will become mainstream?
Yeah, so the security token exchanges, I think you're going to start seeing them come out live, sometime next year in 2019, right? I think 2018, you've got some people that have fake launched or have said they've launched or have done some test trades, but it hasn't really, there aren't enough players. There aren't really any deals. There's not really any volume, right? So as for whether there's actually going to be liquidity when that happens, I think you need deals that are interesting. You need many deals, and then you need a wide base of investors that are interested in trading these. And then ideally, you have some method of price discovery and information. A lot of private companies are not used to giving out information. So if they don't give out any information, it's very difficult for an outsider to go trade it, right? So someone has to go out and make information possible so that someone can create a price and know what to trade for. So for example, and I don't think, by the way, that trading has to be active, right? If you're a real estate transaction and you've historically done transactions and nobody has basically ever sold anything other than like very one-off transactions where they're privately done through two parties that know each other. If you even get a little bit of liquidity, that's value add, right? Instead of having to be locked up, maybe it's hard to sell, but at least it's easier to sell than it's ever been before, right? That itself could be value add, even though there might be very few secondary transactions, right? But in order for that to happen, someone like you or I will actually have to know about that project. We will have to know that project exists. We have to know that what that project is worth. We'll have to be able to get some data in order to make a price bid. So without that sort of transparency, secondary market liquidity is going to be a little bit tougher.
And moving on to an issue of real estate tokenization. So there are a lot of deals happening right now. For example, tokenization of St. Regis.
In Aspen.
Yeah, in Aspen. A lot of partnerships happening right now. What do you think about that? So does it really solve the problem?
I don't think that tokenization necessarily has to solve a problem. I think it does solve many problems, but I don't think it actually has to solve a problem, right? It could just be a better way of doing things, right? Like if you are doing accounting and you're doing it, by hand, and then, accounting software comes out, you start saying, whoa, this is a lot better than doing it by hand. So you switch to that accounting software. And then when someone comes out and makes a better accounting software, then you say, well, hey, this is a lot easier to use. It's faster. It allows me to do this, this, and that, and it takes me less time. Then you switch to that accounting software. So tokenization, in order for it to have a meaningful effect on the industry, doesn't have to revolutionize the industry. It just has to make it better, right? And I think it has, right? Real estate deals have been around since the beginning of time. And real estate is interesting because they tend to be really good at adopting alternative methods of finance and things like that, right? So if you look at large real estate deals, they've either always been done by a few parties or they've tried to pool many people together. But when you pool many people together, there's a lot of tracking issues and things like that tokenization helps solve. And if you look at crowdfunding, crowdfunding was this idea, of course, that many people, regular people, or accredited investors could come together to invest in a project that ordinarily they would have gone to friends and family, right? So real estate dominated crowdfunding by far. So tokenization is really the next evolution of crowdfunding, and it promises to be a little bit more efficient and promises to make secondary trading a little bit easier to achieve.
Many people claim that actually this new type of like tokenized assets, like in the whole idea of security tokenization, it needs new legal framework, new mechanism to make this happen legally around the world. Do you think it really falls under like already existing regulations, or to make it work, we need some new ones?
I think the current regulations could work a little bit. I mean, clearly it's well defined. The same reason why an investor needs protection from a possible investment opportunity that existed before tokenization. Just because you tokenized doesn't mean that they suddenly need less protection, right? So I think, just tokenization by itself under the existing frameworks doesn't necessarily mean the existing frameworks are broken. That being said, at least in the US, the securities laws and many of these financial laws were built in a different time. Like, for example, back in the 30s, it was very difficult to find information. If a company was lying to you, it'd be hard for you to diligence that. So the concept of like, okay, well, let's make them register and provide you all this information made a lot more sense back then. But like these days, honestly, it's pretty easy to do diligence. It doesn't mean like everyone knows how to do it, right? That's an educational problem. But if you wanted to do diligence on a company, there's public websites. You can see if they're actually incorporated. You can go do Google searches. You could even view them online, from like, free Google Maps and things like that. You could easily hire someone remotely to go take a look at it, and you could collaborate and talk to people, right? So it's a completely different framework. I think it's worth looking at the securities laws from the beginning to kind of say, look, should we think about this differently The world is much more global. A lot of people want to participate in these. You're seeing this divide where the rich and the sophisticated and the connected have access to deals that make them richer, while the regular people just, this divide just keeps spreading. Is there something that we can do because the times have changed, the technology has changed, so that we can bring everyone the same opportunities? And I think that's worth considering.
You mentioned that one of the benefits of being an early adopter is an opportunity to become like this creator of a new protocol. Also, maybe some unified standard for security tokens. In your opinion, are there any standards that have more chances to become one like that?
The next big thing.
Yeah, this is funny because you now have this space where you've got a standard like ERC20 clearly is a standard, I think, right? Everybody recognizes it as a standard. It's been officially adopted, and it's got actual usage, right? Now you have a lot of other people just coming out, and even if they just issue out one token, one-time use, they call it a standard, right? So I think you can hope that something will become a standard, and say this is how we've done it. But I think there are no other standards today. um, the closest things to standards would probably be something like a protocol that's been promulgated by like a Harbor R token or like a securitized DS or like a Polymath ST20 or something like that. But again, how many people have actually used that? Is it really a standard, right? It's not a standard until there's widespread adoption and people agree to do that, to use it. And standards don't usually get adopted in like a few months. They usually take many, many years for them to fully develop and get adopted. Right now, I think, possibly the potential to have a standard at the moment is possibly ERC 1400 or EIP 1400. There seems to be involvement by many players in the marketplace for that. There seems to be involvement by law firms, a lot of people in the blockchain space, as well as a lot of people that are in the traditional regulated space. Is it the best standard? Maybe, maybe not. Is it the one that seems to have gotten the most attention, and people using it, or at least collaborating on it? It does.
Speaking about funny, when you were in Malta like a couple of weeks ago, and I was there and she wasn't, it was one of the first conference, like one of the few where I was alone without Masha because she was on vacation. But you tweeted, or no, it was on Facebook, that playing poker, and casinos are official in Malta, it's safer than ICOs. And will poker will be safer than STOs or not?
That's actually an interesting analogy. I basically said that we were all gambling, right? Like it was a joke to suggest that, we were all gambling. But as with most things, even in gambling, if you know what you're doing, your odds are significantly better than if you don't know what you're doing, right? There's a way to gamble correctly and increase the odds, and there's a way to gamble incorrectly. And it's same with investing, right? A lot of people that invest don't do that well. And even just a little bit of education gives you a lot of edge. So I think that when you look at poker and you sit down at a poker table, the people who clearly know what they're doing over time do a lot better than the folks that don't know what they're doing. The person that builds the house usually always wins, right? So in SEOs, same thing. I think the person that is that is a smart investor, that's very knowledgeable, they will probably always do a little bit better than the next person that's just randomly investing. And then the people that are building the house, if the whole industry wins, then all the infrastructure players, et cetera, they should win. It comes back down, I think, to education and making sure that people are armed with the knowledge and know how to invest instead of gamble.
In general, do you think governments are looking into like appearing as good guys who support the initiative, even though they don't yet know exactly what to do with that, or they do not really care about appearing as the supporters?
I think you get differences between governments. It depends as a government where you find the balance, right? Like you could take an extreme position and just say, too many people are losing money, there's a complete and outright ban. And while that is not great for innovation, it's hard to deny that if you're a government that, like, for example, prevented crypto from happening in your own country, that over the last year, you probably protected a lot of people, right? You probably prevented a lot of scams. You probably protected a lot of investors from losing 70, 80, 90% of their wealth. So is that a bad stance? Is that extreme stance? Maybe, maybe not, right? They could always look to see what other people do and then adopt it. I don't think this is one of those things where you always balance it. It's a idea of like, do you want to be the early adopter or do you want to be the person that comes up? I think we're early enough that you don't have to have been the first to move in order to still be influential. So I think, for example, the US has been a little bit less progressive and slower to adopt than many of the other people that are trying to be, clearly crypto friendly, right?
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it might be smart, right? If you are too quickly adopting one, extreme stance, like no, we ban, or yes, we're going to welcome all of them, you could easily make a mistake and kill off and stifle innovation, or encourage a lot of bad activity that you don't really actually want to happen in your country. So I think the US has been smart in taking it slowly. They clearly want to foster the technology. They've been careful not to over-regulate. I think they could have busted a lot more people than they've chosen to, and they've been trying to set examples and set out guidance and give multiple warnings while they watch. And frankly, the experts in the space don't even know how to think about the space. How do you expect the regulators to get there? And then how do you expect the politicians to get there? We're still very, very early on in this. I think it's understandable if they take a little bit of time to think about the laws. I'd rather them think about it properly and then come out with a great law than just react and come out with a non-usable law. And then how do you expect the politicians to get there? We're still very, very early on in this. I think it's understandable if they take a little bit of time to think about the laws. I'd rather them think about it properly and then come out with a great law than just react and come out with a non-usable law.
What is your opinion on Malta? Like recently, it has become like the space,
new Mecca,
Mecca for
security tokens.
yeah, but not a lot of people seem to actually know what the hype is all about.
I think for Malta or Singapore or Gibraltar or any of these countries that are making it more friendly, there are a few things, right? First off, one has to look at, if I'm in another country's jurisdiction and it's more friendly, what does that really mean for me, right? So for example, if you know that you're going to do business in the US, you know that you're going to sell your tokens to the US, you know that you're going to have your tokens traded in the US, it doesn't matter if your jurisdiction is on Mars and you're unregulated, or you're in Malta and it's friendly, or you're in a very unfriendly place, right? You could be in the most unfriendly place or the most friendly place, but you're still going to have to deal with US regulations. And if you go to Singapore and you start targeting their country, and if you go to London and the UK and you start targeting them, their laws are all going to apply, right? So when you go to overseas jurisdiction, you have to understand why you're going there, right? And one reason might be, for example, if you're conducting an activity that would be illegal in one place, but it's legal in that particular place, right? The other thing to know about a lot of these laws are that a lot of these laws don't necessarily touch upon investments, right? Like financial instruments, right? So if I'm not a Malta expert, but my understanding is there's this set of crypto regulations that if you can show them that you're not essentially a financial instrument, then this friendlier set of laws will apply. If you're really clearly a security, your financial products laws are still going to apply. It's no friendlier than it ever was, before. So to the extent that in Singapore's done the same thing, they've basically said, like, look, if you truly are a financial product, then you're going to fall within this existing regime that has existed for forever to regulate investments. Now, for us in the security token industry, that's problematic because most of the security tokens are security tokens because they are some sort of investment product or financial product. And therefore, for a lot of us, the crypto-friendly regulations might not necessarily apply that much, actually. In the security token industry, that's problematic because most of the security tokens are security tokens because they are some sort of investment product or financial product. And therefore, for a lot of us, the crypto-friendly regulations might not necessarily apply that much, actually.
This week we saw some case that seemed quite ridiculous to us. Some guys were saying that they are launching a security token platform, and to create it, they launched their security token offering, but their tokens will be securities in the gas, and in all other places they will be utilities.
This has come out because of uncertainty in the regulations, right? Like, a lot of people don't have the ability to figure out, like, am I a security or am I a utility? Do I fall into, this, particular framework, or do I fall into this different set of laws, right? And it's really kind of difficult that, and frustrating that we think of things that way, because the reality is that, whether you're a utility or not is one question, and then whether you're a security or not, or have been sold as a security offering or not, is a different question, right? That's why someone like Malta is interesting, because you can apply for them to determine what you are, and if they make a determination of what you are, I think probably absent fraud or something like that, you get some certainty, right? Otherwise, you get these people who say, like, look, I clearly believe I'm a utility token, but just in case, I'm going to treat it as a security, right? And that causes that's a new area. We don't know what that means. What does that mean if the US treats something as a security, and then someone else in the world doesn't treat it as security? And does that mean you can have the same type of token that has some value and these certain features, but then in the US they get limited features? Does that mean that the same token is worth different amounts of utility? Because if one comes with legal burdens and rights, even though it's utility, it's still worth less. And a perfect example of that is in California, for example. You can buy an electric vehicle that gives you access to special lanes, right? Because your energy saving. So you could buy another electric vehicle that doesn't give you access to those special lanes, right? So they're both cars, they're both clearly utility, but one has more value because it's got extra right that another one doesn't have, right? And same thing, if one doesn't have the legal right to be able to do something, in that case, the legal right to drive in that lane, then it's got less utility. So it's important to clarify between, like, are there different tokens being offered, or are there the same token being offered with different rights? If one doesn't have the legal right to be able to do something, in that case, the legal right to drive in that lane, then it's got less utility. So it's important to clarify between, like,
many people are asking how they can get an advisor for their security token project, and they clearly don't know, like, who to go to, because they want someone who is involved, who knows about this.
It's difficult when you deal with securities, at least with the US framework, right? In a perfect world, an advisor would be anyone that has useful knowledge that just gives you advice and helps point you in the right direction. Theoretically, anyone should be able to do that, right? The problem is when it comes to financial products and people's money and the ability for people to lose money, that becomes regulated for obvious reasons, right? You don't want random people getting cheated by people who are supposed to be their advisors, right? So this space tends to be regulated, right? There's a certain part of advisory which you can just do. Like, that doesn't require a license just because it's general knowledge, right? And then at some point you cross the line, right? And when you cross the line and you start giving advice where they start thinking, like, this is really professional advice, and we want the people that are giving professional advice to know what they're doing, understand some rules of engagement like ethics, and be held accountable. That's when you get licenses. And I think in this space, the best licensed advisors are going to be professional attorneys that know the law, know the space. They will be a good advisor if they've got the right background. For people that are teaching you or explaining to you how to make investments, or making investments on your behalf, that would be a registered investment advisor, someone that's gotten a little bit of training on what they can or cannot do, what they should or should not do in terms of advising and dealing with other people's money. And then also broker dealers for the companies that are looking for how to do this and how to find investors and how to tokenize. Broker dealers are also registered and regulated so that they understand how they can sell things, what duties they have to the people that they sell to, what duties do they have to the company that they're going to, and saying, like, I'll help you raise money to these things. So in a perfect world, you'd go to those advisors. Now, as you've noted, there aren't that many advisors that are that great. There aren't that many lawyers that are tremendously good at the law and the technology and the players and things like that. There are almost no broker dealers that are great broker dealers in terms of being able to sell out deals, but that know compliance and tokenization. And then RAs, I think there are a few more. But we're early on, these people will come out. In the meantime, I think people that want to be advisors have to be very careful that they don't cross the line and go do that. And this happens with big companies and small companies. You've seen the SEC release materials on making sure that people have the right licenses to do things. So unfortunately, finding advisors are quite difficult, but I think if you poke around the security token ecosystem, it's clear that you can start clearly seeing that there's some people that are very, very active in those spaces. And if you can try to get those advisors as subject matter and knowledge experts to agree to advise you, that should be helpful. Difficult, but I think if you poke around the security token ecosystem, it's clear that you can start clearly seeing that there's some people that are very, very active in those spaces. And if you can try to get those advisors as subject matter and knowledge experts to agree to advise you, that should be helpful.
You were saying that right now the main threshold to entering the security token market stays the same, it's wealth. Do you think that in perspective the whole industry will move towards contributing to the general public other than just making the rich richer?
Yes, I do think it will evolve there, depending on the industry largely, and whether I think we get better education. So already in the US, in the last few years, you had a body of laws come out that allowed non-accredited investors to invest in opportunities that they never would have been able to invest before, right? So even without tokenization, this was happening already. And as those laws came out, two things happened, right? The companies that were taking advantage of those laws said, make it even easier. And then a lot of investors said, yes, give us more. We want more. You have to balance it, right? If the laws get too friendly without the education and enforcement being there to protect the investors, then what will happen is you will get a bunch of investors that will get wiped out. And then you're going to have an extreme reaction where they'll pass laws again to protect those investors, right? So I think what would be helpful is if I realize this is hard to do, but like the people who are in crypto or, this industry that are trying to get easier laws, try to think long term. Don't be greedy. Don't try to get what's good for you today, but really think about what's good for the health of the ecosystem forever, right? And work on that. And then, I think it goes back to the education. Like right now, especially in the US, you have this culture of, I lost my money, who do I go sue? If we can change that culture to be I lost my money, I should have been smarter about how I diligenced it and things like that. That makes a big difference, right? I invested in a scam ICO before, and I lost my money. And when I looked at it afterward, I was like, man, I really should have done diligence better. I didn't go look at it and be like, who am I going to go sue, right? Yeah, they were fraudulent. I should have the right to sue them, but really I should take some ownership and understanding there, so that's not the first thing that crosses my mind. If we can get all of that, then I think that we have a chance of getting the laws to be more friendly. But a lot of the investors that are complaining about these laws, they're part of the problem, right? Instead of complaining about these laws, they should show why they deserve for the laws to be opened up and why they don't need protection. It's unfair that they have to do that, but history has shown that laws are passed sometimes and they harm some people, but for the greater collective good. All right, thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Right, be opened up and why they don't need protection. It's unfair that they have to do that, but history has shown that laws are passed sometimes and they harm some people, but for the greater collective good. All right, thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.